Hi, my name is Elvis Mendez. I'm the co-director of Neighbor Neighbor, Massachusetts. It's a pleasure to be with you. A little over a year ago, how many of us could have imagined that we would be living through a crisis that fundamentally disrupted every facet of our lives? Even fewer of us could have foreseen that some people would continue to earnestly believe that the ongoing crisis was a hoax. Many parallels can be drawn between COVID-19 and the climate crisis. But what I want you to focus on today is this. In our polarized society, even during crisis, truth alone will not win out. We need to organize, which means we need to build and persuade across difference, address the tools of division directly, and center the most impacted communities in our political representation and in our policymaking. At Neighbor to Neighbor, we've been developing tools and methodologies to break these information silos, build multiracial coalitions, and champion people and policies that will work for the benefit of us all. We're asking everyone to join us in this fight because all of us are invested in the outcome. Now, we know the climate crisis is well underway, and it will disrupt the lives of every living being across the planet. Communities of color will be disproportionately impacted by the crisis due to already being subject to greater environmental harm. In Massachusetts, we also have a voting and representation gap among communities of color. This voting and representation gap is leading to environmental policies that harm us all, people of color most acutely. Now, we have members living across the state with contaminated water, others with waste stations built in their neighborhoods and landfills proposed down the block. These are failures of policy and representation. But more than that, they're what environmentalist Rob Nixon has called acts of slow violence. This is harm. It's harm that occurs gradually, out of sight, and over time, but with devastating consequences. It's harm that is further minimized because it's happening to people whose voices are already seen as marginal. Neighbor to Neighbor is best positioned to lead on this front because we are led by people from these communities and because of our unique organizational model and methodology. Neighbor to Neighbor is a statewide people's organization based in gateway cities with a 501c3 and a 501c4. We strategically target tens of thousands of neglected, infrequent voters in working class communities of color to support candidates and legislation that champion climate mitigation, adaptation, and resiliency. Here's how our organizing model works. We build relationships with people in the community through issue advocacy and electoral campaigns that are based on shared values. Values like love, solidarity, integrity, imagination, to get them to take collective action. In the process, overcoming fear and isolation to combat structural inequalities. We tackle issues of climate and environmental harm by addressing the material needs our members care about. Better housing and transportation, cleaner cities, good jobs. Like when our 501c3 education fund led the closing of Mount Tom coal plant, converting it to a solar field. Or when our 501c4 has helped elect many climate champions like Congressman Jim McGovern and just last year, our member, State Senator Adam Gomez. In doing so, we help people work together across racial differences to create a healthier democracy and more equitable and resilient communities. The key to making this all work is effective community engagement methods. Over the last year, Neighbor Neighbor has been developing a community outreach approach known as deep canvassing with national partners that has proven to be the most effective method for shifting opinions among voters. In last year's presidential election, our 501c4 worked with our partners at People's Action and Pennsylvania to shift opinions among voters. Just under half of the people we engage shifted their opinion in a positive direction, and a quarter moved from one end of the spectrum to another. This year, we're partnering with People's Action, sister organizations in New York City and Minneapolis, and faculty at Columbia University to test these movement and persuasion rates with low-income communities of color in local elections. To that end, we are asking for a 2-year, $500,000 investment in our deep canvassing program to shift climate perception among different communities and spur the adoption of policies supporting climate action and preparedness in Massachusetts. This investment would go towards program iteration and development, and most importantly, towards training and hiring 12 to 14 member leaders to lead volunteer teams to knock on an average of 100,000 doors each year. We know that to solve these complex problems, it takes a multifaceted approach. And as an organization based in working class communities of color, operating with an intersectional framework, it underlies everything that we do. Before he was taken from us, our brother and late neighbor organizer, Jafet Robles, posed to all of us this question. What do you want to be remembered for? At Neighbor to Neighbor, we want to be remembered as an organization that helped close the voting gap and spurred action on the most pressing challenge of our time by strengthening our most vulnerable communities. We hope to count on your support in this effort. Thank you.